Cassidy Megan here with Unmasked Cassidy Megan podcast. Today we're here with Daniel from PEI. Daniel, do you want to give an introduction of yourself?
I'm Daniel Boudreau. I am from Cornwall, PEI, and I have had epilepsy since I was 4.
Sorry. So Daniel, how does epilepsy affect you?
Well, epilepsy has affected me actually in a couple of different ways. Of course, when you're growing up and that stuff, you're always feeling like you're different from everybody else because you're going to doctor's appointments all the time and you're taking pills every day and you're constantly getting things that are saying, well, we're not really sure what we can do, or maybe we'll move you to this medication. So you kind of feel different from everybody else. And then getting older, when you're going through like puberty and into your teenage years, perhaps some of the medications that you had before stop working. So then you're not able to go to school as much. And once again, kind of feeling like an outsider. And then, of course, that can also transfer into the workplace when you get older, because there are certain positions where you have to be there all the time. I actually chose to go into culinary as my first career. So I was working in kitchens. And little did I know that kitchens were not a welcoming place for anybody who cannot be there anytime really. The joke always used to be with culinary, you better have a death certificate if you want a day off.
That would be hard with epilepsy. And I know, like my aunt, she has a chef and is doing is in the culinary, but has to take time off, and she's doing good. But it's a lot of stress too, which can for a lot of people induce the seizures. So I feel like breaks have to be necessary, and the workplace would have to be understanding.
Yeah, and I mean, I think things are getting a little bit better now, but with certain industries, it's still to a point where there's no real understanding for something that you can't see. Something like epilepsy, I can go 6 months, 7 months doing really good, and then all of a sudden something could happen with a lot of stress or my medication, and then I'll have a couple of down days, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, where did this come from? And you get accusations of being lazy, accusations of not wanting to go to work. I've gotten accused of being drunk or doing drugs, none of which was true. I wanted to be there just as much as anybody else. And that's truly what I believe anybody who has an invisible illness such as epilepsy wants. They want routine. They want to be a part of society just like anybody else does.
Definitely. And as people don't always realize that too, and that the discrimination we face really plays a factor in our everyday life. Do you want to touch on some of the discrimination you faced in your culinary work experience?
Well, it was just, like I mentioned about if my epilepsy, the seizures that I have usually would present themselves at night. So I could go all day with, nothing going wrong. I could be doing a work shift, everything would be fine. But if I would have seizures at night, then I would say, if I was doing a morning shift, I would have to call in and say, you know what, I'm really not feeling well. I had, a seizure last night. Can I maybe do an afternoon shift? And you can maybe do that a couple of times, but once it gets to be, 3, 4, 5 times, not necessarily even in a row, then they think that there's something else going wrong.
Okay. And how did you like, so when you faced the discrimination and the stigma, how did you deal with it?
Well, in the early days of it, especially when I first graduated from culinary school, I just took it really because I didn't know what I could do. Because there are certain industries, if you speak out about things or if you try and go against your boss, you will be blacklisted, especially, in a small place like the Maritimes. A lot of restaurants have associations that they belong to for the community. So they're all talking about employees, who potential hires, different things like that. So it was more or less something that I thought, no, I can't talk about this. I just have to take it. If I got fired from a job for my epilepsy, I'd just apply for something else, hopefully far away if I could. But that's unfortunately how a lot of people have to deal with stuff like this.
I'm sorry you had to go through all that, Daniel. It really shows though how like why epilepsy awareness and education is still so important and prevalent today because this is still happening to people too.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I think a big thing for me to get across to people is there's not one type of seizure. There's not one type of epilepsy. You know, we had a lot of commercials back in the 90s showing tonic-clonic seizures of somebody out in a playground. Not everybody presents their epilepsy like that. People can have focal seizures, people can have complex partial epilepsy, you know, many types of seizures that don't present like that. So they can live almost normal lives until, you know, something might go wrong. But then other people need to be aware that that can happen. Just because my life every day looks like I have no illness, I have one, and I've had it for 27 years.
Definitely couldn't not have said it better myself. And I guess because the tonic-clonic and grand malls are the ones that are usually portrayed on TVs and in videos, as they are very more visible ones, I guess. But there's over 40 different types of seizures, and that's something I've been trying to stress a lot too recently. Is just that there is so many different types than types that we might not even know of yet too.
No, absolutely. I totally agree with that. And I think even just getting that information out there would make people perhaps go online and look up types of seizures, you know, different types of epilepsy. You know, it's just like cancer. You know, there's not one type of cancer. You can get cancer in any part of your body. And
Yeah.
there are certain types of cancer that are basically a death sentence. And there are certain types of cancer where, you know, somebody has a little polyp on their skin, you can get it removed and you can go on living your everyday life.
They they both are very dependent on the person in the case, and that's something people realize too, is that even if you have a different type of seizure, that's not the only difference. Every person with epilepsy, the treatments, the medications, what works for me might not work for you. Like everything's so dependent on the person. And
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. And, you know, some medications can work for one person, some medications might not work for every or another person. Everybody you have to look at with medical conditions as there's not one case that will go across the board,
mm-hmm.
especially when you're doing medications for things. It all depends on your age, your weight, your all of that stuff. So you really can't put anybody in one box.
You can't, and that's why, like, in one way, it's good because we learn more about each and every condition that way, with everyone be having some kind of difference, but also similarities, and learn how to work around that. What are some of the obstacles aside from like the workplace discrimination we talked about that you've kind of faced growing up with epilepsy that
I
you've had to
think a lot of
overcome?
the obstacles that I faced was getting the proper care, to be quite honest, because there are certain physicians that are trained in epilepsy and are specialists in that area, but then there are other physicians who aren't. And I mean, I actually only found out myself within the last couple of years that even a neurologist, if you go see a general neurologist, they're not trained in epilepsy. There are neurologists that are actually epileptologists, which is a training in epilepsy. So if you're seeing a neurologist for a long time that doesn't specifically have epilepsy training, you might not be getting everything, you know, given to you as resources. Like I was always given EEGs, I was always given CAT scans, I was always given MRIs, but it was not until I went over to Halifax almost 10 years ago now that I was given a PET scan. And that what was the thing that actually found where my epilepsy was coming from so we could do surgery.
Wow, that's really interesting. I don't think I've had a PET scan before. I don't know. What's amazing that like coming here and like that you were able to have those more resources to the more different avenues to help diagnose you properly.
Yeah, and I think like that's a big thing too out there is I don't think a lot of people realize that depending on where you live, you don't have those resources. Like as somebody who lives in PEI, I can't go to our hospital and get a PET scan. We don't have a PET scan machine. We don't have a lot of neurologists over here who are trained in epilepsy. Currently on PEI, I believe there's only one. And I mean, if you have a lot of people with a condition who need to see a specialist and say perhaps they're taking trips into Emerge, taking trips to, you know, walk-in clinics when they have, you know, their epilepsy act up. Those physicians aren't actually trained to say, okay, this is what our plan's going to be.
It's so true, and definitely needs more resources, and so I'm glad PEI is close to Halifax, so that transportation isn't too long. Of course, having more there would be better, but that's a that could be a project to work on for sure.
Oh yeah, and I mean definitely being in the Maritimes, we are so lucky because we have centers like Halifax where, obviously it's not, a 10-minute drive for everybody, but getting, it's only 3 hours from here to Halifax. So me going over there and getting to see epilepsy specialists, like I've had Dr. Sadler and, coordinators like Susan Rahe, who was an amazing, amazing patient advocate for everyone. And it's just like she was the type of person who was of the mindset, you're not a file, you are not a number, you are a patient.
Mm.
And everybody over there has been that way. And I have to say a big congrats to that whole team because it has changed my life and it has changed so many people's lives. I hear the same thing from everybody who I speak to about them.
They're an amazing team for sure. I'm so blessed we have them. Been here in the Maritimes, been able to help out so much, so vastly. So we talked a lot about like stuff that people don't usually know. What is something else you wish people knew about epilepsy?
I wish people knew the amount of self advocacy it took to, sometimes get services, sometimes get medication. It's not something as simple as, you cut your arm and you go to the hospital and get stitches. Sometimes, it can take days, it can take weeks to get programs in place, or if you don't know programs, to hook up with somebody who, say a social worker who could help you with that stuff. And also, a lot of epilepsy medication is extremely expensive. My medication, for instance, is almost $1,000 per month. So even somebody who is working a full-time job will not be able to afford medication unless they have a medical plan. So they would need to utilize some government programs, like perhaps something even like income assistance. Most people will look at income assistance and say, oh my God, that's welfare. Well, income assistance is actually meant to help people even when they have jobs. So they do have a medication program or something else, even through the health profile. You can get compassionate care programs through the medical companies, but through the health profile, you can get stuff like a catastrophic drug plan or even the provincial drug program, stuff like that. You have to look into every avenue. And unfortunately, there isn't enough education out there about what those avenues are.
So kind of expanding on that, so with the invisible conditions and illnesses like epilepsy have various struggles people don't realize, and with the medications being so expensive at times. Um, so on like the topic of like medications being costly and all that, I know like we're working really hard with mental health and working on changing and finding new avenues to help make medication treatment more affordable. I know you do a lot of work with the government and compassionate care. Um, what are some like avenues and options you come across that help with the expenses of treatments?
Well, like I had mentioned before, there are things like income assistance, which is they usually will have a medication program attached to them. And if you go back to work, you can be potentially able to access that program for up to a year. But once that cuts off, you will have to find something else. And a few months ago, that was extremely hard for me because I didn't know the other avenues. So I had to get in contact with a social worker over here with the hospital, who then opened up some avenues about drug programs through our Minister of Health. So there'd be a compassionate care program, or there would be a provincial government drug plan. Anything like that are all things that, no matter where you are, especially in Canada, province to province, they'll be called different things or something like that. But those are things that you do have to access. And one of the things that I found extremely difficult about going through it is it has a big, big drain on your overall health and mental health. Because if you know that you need this medication, and one of my medications is, I think, $400, and you have to go and get that, but you don't have the money, you're in your mind thinking, oh my God, I'm going to lose my job. oh my God, I'm going to get sick. Oh my God, everything's going to crash and burn. That's what's in your head.
Definitely. There's been times where even my medications have been really expensive. We've had to change things around and like figure out ways that we could afford it. Um, I definitely know those struggles. We have to deal with as well, and we've gone without things so that we can afford the medications. Because and like our doctors have been really good with like helping us trying to be able to have access to this medication that might help and still keep it around, keeping it in our budget of like what we can possibly afford.
And I think that's another thing that people, I don't think people understand, that having to choose between lights and having to choose between medication, or having to choose between rent and having to choose between medication, is not something that you look at, you know, a very, very poor person and say that only affects them. That affects people with 9 to 5 jobs. That affects people with full-time work. That affects so many people who right now in our economy are living paycheck to paycheck. So you can't look at society and just look at the lower bar of it and say that only affects them. That can affect so many people.
It does, and I know like some things that like when I was younger and I didn't understand how all of it worked. I found when I was older that my mom would actually be like skip and miss her medications and refills so that I could have my epilepsy meds, or so that we could refill our puffers.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Well,
the sacrifices we have to make, and like we have like we're not like poor, but we're not well off. Like we're like somewhere in the middle-ish, not even.
we're that wonderful middle class that everybody talks about.
Yeah. So it's like, you know, sometimes, and like with life and that it throws at you, sometimes it can be paycheck to paycheck. Sometimes it can be better. Sometimes it can be worse. And when look at these avenues are so great because it can really help make getting this treatment, and despite life's curveballs that it throws at you, you can still be able to get this treatment that you need to continue living your life to the
Mm-hmm.
fullest.
No, I totally agree with that. And I mean, an instance with me that really, I think really got me down more than anything was when I was living in Halifax and going back to school to take my paralegal course. I was basically told that if you go back to school through this program, we can no longer fund your medication. And so I was at a catch 22, really, because with no meds, I can't go to school. And with no school, I can't get a job. So I literally had to call up different resources around there. And I was fortunate enough to find the Metro dispensary through the IWK. And that was really something that saved me for those, even if it was just a few weeks or a month until I could access or speak to the powers that be to change things. Because it's great. And I don't think a lot of people know about it unless they are within the health system.
Well, even then, like, so I've been like going to doctors Synergy like all my life, like first name basis with some of the doctors. And it wasn't until like sometime in high school that I learned about the Metro dispensary. It was for a different health issue, aside from epilepsy, and I needed medication for that was really expensive. And we were getting like my meds from like the drug store, like Walmart's or Zeller's, stuff like that, wherever we could. And when we started getting to like there's the stress of it wasn't good on the epilepsy either and the mental health. So when we got referred to for this medication to the Metro dispensary, we just transferred all my medications there. And like what I was paying for one, I ended up paying for 2 or 3 different medications at the same time. Like it's so makes things so much easier and less stressful. It's so much more affordable.
That's what angered me when I found out how much I was getting it before the fact, after the fact of the Metro dispensary, and how much the markup is and the dispensing fees. Oh, believe me, I had a long chat with Susan about that.
It's crazy, like the difference, and yeah, like where the difference is so drastic that all those fees that the drugstores are making on the dispensary fees when they could be having it more affordable. Like, I don't know. We're very blessed that we have the dispensary, and that if you get referred to them, it can definitely is a good avenue to have and
Oh,
help you
absolutely.
out.
Like, and I agree. Like, there are so many people who perhaps live in different parts of the country, different parts of the world that wouldn't have that. And we are very fortunate enough to be where we are and to have accesses to those resources. You know, I'm quite thankful every day that that's there.
I am very much thankful too. It's just all the stress that like before you have the dispensary, like all the stress with getting medications and treatments. It's not good for stress induces seizures, which then makes you. That's why you need treatments and medications in the first place. And then the stress and that worry is also not good for the mental health aspect of it.
And I always, if I'm ever advocating with an agency or with a government official or anybody, that's what I always try and get around, because it's literally a circle. So epilepsy, I have epilepsy, but if I had the medication for the epilepsy, I could work, and if I could work, then my mental health would be better, and I would feel like I'm giving back to society. If you take one thing out of that circle of things, it all falls apart. And especially something as you know, as important as medication, and that can be done so simply but sometimes isn't, then it just really causes so much stress for the patient, so much stress for the people around the patient, friends, family, whatever. And that's another thing that really I don't think people understand, is that people with any kind of illness, they're not just the only one affected. It's the caretakers, it's the parents, it's the family, it's the friends, it's the everybody else who, you know, is always
Everyone in your
thinking,
circle
yeah.
that you associate with, that you have a relationship with, is affected.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another thing I've been trying to work on getting out there is that, like you said, it's not just the epilepsy, it's what the mental aspect on you, and then it's how it affects your loved ones and your associates and the worry that they feel about it for you. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not always talked about a lot either.
Well, I have found myself in different times in my life in a place where I'll be like, okay, do I share this? Is it going to make them feel uncomfortable? Are they going to know what to do with it? Whether it be with, you know, a friend, an intimate partner, whatever. It's really hard because then you feel like, oh my God, you know, you're having one of those discussions where you almost feel like you're going to throw up because you don't know what the end result's going to be,
Yeah,
because it's stigma. It's like anything else in society that bears a certain amount of stigma. You don't want to let that, your vulnerability, to show to somebody because you don't know what you're going to get back.
exactly. And it's something that, vulnerability has, it can be scary, but it's also so important to put yourself in those positions so that not only so for your own safety down the road, but also so even say if it was with an intimate partner, it doesn't work out with you two. Later on the road, they could be walk down the street,
Mm-hmm.
and someone have a seizure, and because you shared that, they know how to help this person. They know how to. They're now aware of epilepsy and what it is and how to help.
One instance where I was coming out of the legislature here in Charlottetown, I was able to speak with an official who was in the legislature and had seen the work that I was doing. And he just was asking some general questions about myself, work, different things like that. And I had brought up that I had epilepsy. And from that comment, we kind of started to explore the different things about epilepsy, the different kinds of seizures. And he wasn't aware that there was more than one type of seizure. And I think that really goes back to some of the stuff that's been in the media, because when you are constantly seeing epilepsy, um, as somebody falling to the floor and shaking and all of that stuff, that's really all you think of, somebody having a seizure. Well, you know, I'm happy that I was there in that place for that time to answer that question for somebody, because perhaps they'll go home and do some more research.
Definitely. And I was so glad that that happened. even like in this kind of in the political field like that, you are in the front row associating, for lack of a better word, dealing with the public. And the public, if like what is it, 100 people will have epilepsy or have a seizure, like you're gonna run into people who have different kinds of epilepsy. So now that he knows that, if they do go back and go home and look up epilepsy, they know how to better help their community and their position, and they better know if how to react if someone at one of these press conferences has a seizure.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And, another instance was when I was doing my paralegal program over in Dartmouth. That was really the first time that I had ever taken it upon myself to do some epilepsy education in the classrooms, because Purple Day had come up. And I was just like, okay, this is the time. I am now in another industry. I am now in an industry where I feel safe. I can do this and, perhaps help some people at the same time. So that was the first time that I was able to feel comfortable enough to go classroom to classroom, have the information, all of that stuff, and, answer questions.
That's amazing. How did you find the response when you did that?
I found the response to be really well, because there was a lot of people who, once again, weren't aware that there was different types of seizures. There were even people in the classrooms who I spoke to who maybe even had epilepsy, that they would say, "Oh my gosh, yes, I'm so glad to know that there are other people out there like me," which is something that I think anybody who has any kind of illness or sickness or whatever, if you're feeling alone and you're feeling like nobody gets you, nobody understands what it's like to live and walk in these shoes every day and take that stress. As soon as you find somebody else who is on that same level as you, who deals with that every day, you connect with them instantly, because you guys can talk, you guys can commiserate over things. It's really about community at the end of the day, and knowing that you're not alone.
It really is, and I've had that so many times. I've run people, whether it's with epilepsy or whether it's with like Ehlers-Danlos or other health issues. Like there is that instant connection when you find out you both go through, you both deal with it, you both have it, that you're not alone, and you now have this person that you can relate to
Mm-hmm.
and talk things through. And yes, it's great talking with your friends and your family about it, but to talk to someone who gets it, it's almost validating in a way.
Oh, absolutely. And even when the new epilepsy monitoring unit opened over in Halifax, I remember going to the opening, and there was like the presentation and all that stuff. And I called my mom afterwards. And I said to my mom that night, I finally felt like I was in a room where everyone gets it. You
Mm-hmm.
didn't need to explain yourself. You didn't need to, oh my God, I have epilepsy and it's like this, because you didn't have to say it's like this to anybody. Everybody knew. And
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't happen a lot for many people, but when it does, it's a special thing.
I remember, so I remember like when they were constructing it, Sue taking me, walking me through it, just telling me where everything's gonna be, and like that was amazing. But similar experience, I went to what you just mentioned, like being in a room where everyone gets it. When I went to Camp Brigadoon, like the very first dinner, I was sitting with my cabin at the table, and like, everyone in my cabin had epilepsy except for I think one or two people, and I was like really sore because I was having some like seizure activity, and like just the instant I went to go to explain it, and they're but before I could, they started talking about like, they're like, oh yeah, and this, and I'm like just that overwhelming feeling of I don't have to explain this.
Hmm.
They get it, like
And they're not comparing it to something else,
exactly.
because that, I think, is the biggest thing that annoys me about anything, really. If you say a situation about yourself, oh well, that's kind of like this, and you're like, no, 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 it's not kind of like that. I know you're trying to help, but no.
Yeah, or like even so like sometimes that's a catch 22. Sometimes it can be like say kind of like iffy, but sometimes it can be good because it means they're trying to find something that they know that they can relate it to help better understand what you're going through.
Oh, absolutely. No, I get that point of view too. But that, I think also it goes back to the education piece. The more we get out there, education about epilepsy and seizures and that stuff, then they can actually say, "Oh my gosh, yes, I know what you're going through. I've seen that on TV. I've seen that portrayed in that film. Whatever." Because like it or not, what we see on TV, whether it's in the movies or in TV shows, is not always exactly what a seizure is. It's
A
not
lot of
always
time.
exactly how you should respond to a seizure. There are a lot of cases where I think people see that, and if they are going to respond to somebody actually having a seizure in real life, they're actually going to hurt them more than they're going to help them.
It's so true, and I don't know how many like shows by this point that I've written to that like I've seen like shows I watch and like they hold the person down or they try to like
Mm-hmm.
roll them like not even to their current position but like on their stomach or like they try to put something in their mouth and I'm like whoa, that's not gonna work and you're forcing it. It's gonna cause more damage than you're trying to do. And like sure you might have the best intentions but
Mm-hmm.
in the end result it might not show that. And so that's again it's so important and the people know like or even question like I wonder what that is and if that's correct and then look it up to see if it is and if it
Oh,
isn't to see
absolutely.
what the right way to do it is.
Yeah. No, I can remember a show within the last 5 years where somebody had a drug-induced seizure and they were put on the floor and somebody shoved a wallet in their mouth. And I actually was quite taken aback by that because I figured to myself, okay, this is a newer show. We're going to get some actual techniques in there that weren't from the past 20 years. And it really took me aback because you think all of these shows have medical advisors or they talk to people in hospitals, but perhaps sometimes they don't for some scenes. And if they don't, and it's a critical thing, then it could do, as I said, more harm than good.
It's so true. And I mean that even like in school when I would do like script writing, I think I wrote a script about someone had a mental health issue. And like instead of like just writing what like I imagination of wanted to happen, I looked at what kind of like mental health issue this was that I wrote it, but I forget now. And like how it was usually dealt with. How like I did my research on it so I could portray it properly. And I
Hmm.
think more people should do that.
Well, and I mean, this is going to be a old Hollywood story here for a minute, but
Okay.
it's similar to what Betty Davis actually did back in the day. They gave her a scene. They said, "You're going to be beaten up in this scene. We're going to give you a big head bandage, and that's what you're going to wear." And she said, "No, that's not going to happen. Wait a minute." She left the studio lot. She went to her doctor and said, "Treat me as if I've been beaten, just all beaten by my husband." She had things up her nose. She had patches here and patches there, so much so that when she came back, they didn't even recognize her. And that from then point on was how she filmed all her scenes.
That's amazing. I don't know if I knew that or not. Well, that's an amazing story. Like it's so good that she did that. Not the
And
doctor was like willing to do that for her.
yeah, and I mean sometimes it takes that initiative from people to say, should I accept this as it is, or should I look further?
Mm-hmm. And our film world needs to do more of that. It needs to do more accurate medical and epilepsy like problems. I'm going into the film world now too, and I'm trying to like push for that. And when like I see a script and it has something I'm not sure if they're like what they're trying to get at, I always like ask them like, what do you mean by the scene? Like, what do you want the audience to get from it? Like, what are you trying to portray?
Hmm. And I
And
think we need to see more of these type of medical conditions portrayed in more than just medical shows.
yeah,
I love TV. I watch a lot of film, a lot of TV, old TV, new TV, but I have yet to see a character in any kind of show that is not a medical show live with epilepsy.
mm-hmm.
It's
There's
one thing for people to have cancer and all of these other illnesses that people know more about, but the invisible illnesses, the multiple sclerosis, the epilepsy, the fibromyalgia, a lot of neurological conditions that once again you can't see.
you can't see, and that creativeness of having it actually portrayed on the mainstream TV and film, what people watch every day that's not medical. like showing epilepsy without showing the stereotypical type, like
Mm-hmm.
that one seizure is all. It's not.
Yeah,
Showing these
because
other types of seizures that people can have,
yeah,
and not
because
just
when
like
people see themselves on TV, it's just like, oh my God, they get it. Oh my God, everybody can see this. Everybody can see that, I'm not shaking all over the floor all the time and that the old world things need to be done. You feel, as we said before, validated. And that's more of what we need.
it does, and it shows that epilepsy is more accepted in the world as a general whole, and people see these people with their condition on the big screen, and that could become their hero. And having that accurately represented can help even boost that show's ratings and view count because
Mm-hmm.
it's accurate, because it's relatable more.
Yeah, and I think, once again, with a lot of neurological conditions, there's still so much stigma around them because you can't see them, because, other people are not constantly looking and saying, oh, yes, that person has this issue. But even look at the latest Oscars. There was a film that won an Oscar for their portrayal of dementia. Like, that is still something that, even to this day, there is stigma around. Or
There
mental health, there's a lot of stigma around mental health stuff too, which is, some of those issues can be caused by people having illnesses and that stuff. So
It's so true, and it needs to be talked about a lot more. I just had a question I thought of. Um, what would be like? So if you could have, what would be one idea that you'd have to have this awareness of conditions more? Yeah, to help like erase the stigma and have it more accepted.
I think rather than people, I understand that people post different things on their social media and that stuff about different illnesses and that, or governments will do that. But instead of just making a post, show the post and then show some action. Raise some money for a cause, or show us some programs that will help with people with epilepsy, like, you know giving easier access to all of these, say, drug programs. Give us a portal where we can say, okay, this is available to me, this is available to me. Like, you shouldn't have to be checked into a hospital and access a social worker in order for them to find that. And I think that is one of the things that over the past couple of years has been a real, I wouldn't say anger, but just it really gets me out of sorts, because this could be so easy, but yet it's made so difficult. And putting up a little thing saying that you support epilepsy every now and then, that's great. That's awesome. But what is it doing? It might be getting the awareness out there saying about epilepsy, but it's not fixing the problems within society.
Definitely, and I could not agree more. Um, so kind of like on that, on like finding these avenues and ways to help raise more awareness. Why do you think it's important to support epilepsy associations as a whole?
Well, I think it's important to support any kind of association that is helping out with disabilities or illnesses or anything like that, because what an association can do more than a single person is they have a board, they have directors, they have people there who are part of that community, they have people, doctors, all kinds of things, who are looking at studies, looking at how we can do fundraising, looking at events, looking at all of this stuff that, say, me or you as one single person can't do. But when you get together with a group, that's when you can really have some impact. There are other disability organizations that do that stuff as well, but it's important to really look at what you want out of the organization as to where you're going to put your money or support or volunteering. Volunteering is big too, because not everybody can give money. Some people can just give their time. And, any organization that I've ever been a part of always needs somebody to answer phones. They need somebody to write letters. They need all of that stuff. So get out there and volunteer. Big, big time.
Definitely. And sometimes the time you volunteer is so valuable that it can be equivalent to the money that's donated sometimes because
Oh, definitely. And I've always said, I'm not happy that I have epilepsy, but because of my epilepsy, I have met some of the greatest people. I have met some of the strongest people. I have met some of the most, resilient people, people who have been out there to help me, people who have been out there to be friends with, all of that stuff. And without my epilepsy, I wouldn't have that. And that comes from, some of the volunteering, some of whatever. You gain these friendships, you gain these relationships from doing all that stuff. Even if it's a stay in the hospital, you get those friendships from.
you do.
Because from my stay at the epilepsy monitoring unit in Halifax, I've remained friends with a lot of the people that I met over there.
It's so true. And I actually been saying the same thing recently too. Like, yeah, epilepsy can suck sometimes, but without it, if I was there diagnosed with epilepsy, I wouldn't have found this amazing community, these amazing people like you, like people we met in the EMU, people we met around the world that had epilepsy, and the strength and the determination, the courage you guys all have, that we all have, is impeccable, and it's hard to find, and it's made me stronger learning from all of you guys and all of your everyone's stories I've heard over the years. And same with the EMU unit. I'm still in contact with everyone I've met there, and it's an amazing community feeling.
I find it's a community of people who have a deep fire inside themselves that you can't put out. It's a fire that fosters change, it fosters education, it fosters helping out societies, all of that stuff. And no matter if it's something big you can do or something small you can do, there's not one person that I know from this little community that isn't doing something.
Definitely. Everyone's out there raising awareness the best of their ability and the best they can.
Yeah.
Um, is there anything else you would like to share or talk about?
Um, I guess another thing that I would like to share is how much it can impact all aspects of somebody's life, whether it be your mental health, your career choices. I can't drive. That really affects how I can get around, when I can go to things. A lot of people who have invisible illnesses that takes them away from doing things in their life have to then rely on others. And you then kind of feel like you're a burden and, oh my gosh, should I ask for this or should I not? Or maybe I asked for something yesterday, so I shouldn't ask for a drive today. Not everybody has access to a bus system or access to, cabs. Some places cabs cost a lot of money to get from point A to point B. But I think what we need is a better understanding and people to be more empathetic of what everyone surrounding somebody with epilepsy is going through, or any kind of invisible illness, because it's not only them, it affects all the surrounding people.
Um, it's so true, Daniel, that it does affect every aspect of your life. I know even like bringing the mental health part of it, like I went through the time of depression where, I did when my seizures changed. I wrote a suicide note. I was cutting my arm, and with epilepsy you feel super real secluded too and isolated. Like,
Yeah, that's definitely something I found when I lived in Toronto, when just after I graduated from culinary school. And I got my first job when I was up there. Yay, everything was going great. But then my epilepsy started to act up. And so it began a series of, I'd get a job, I would work it for a certain amount of time, my epilepsy would act up, and then I would get fired. So that probably happened at least uh, 8 or 9 times during the time span that I was up there. And it got me to a point where I was in such a state of just depression that I didn't go out of my house. I didn't go out of my place for probably about 3 or 4 weeks, because at that time, 10 years ago, you couldn't just get meals delivered to you here. That was something that you could only get in like a big city. But in Toronto. I could have the meals delivered to my door. I could, not go out. I had all my TV and everything set up, my internet. I was basically somebody who didn't go out at all. And people who I was speaking to here really noticed that. And the one particular person said, no, you have to get up, you have to go out, whether it's going for a walk or doing a yoga class or something. And that's what got me out of it, because staying inside was not helping. And it was because of my epilepsy and how that affected my job, how that affected what my purpose was in life. If you feel that you don't have a purpose because a medical condition is taking that away, it's very hard, especially when you're up anywhere alone.
It's so true, and even like living on your own, like you feel alone with epilepsy to begin with, sometimes in itself. So when you live on your own too, it increases that.
Yeah, because you don't have somebody right there to help you if something goes wrong. You don't have somebody there to share any experiences with that perhaps happen. And you become a very closed down person. I was definitely closed down for a long, long time because I didn't want people to know anything that happened, especially when I was working in a career that if they found out, I could be booted out the door. So if something happened and I could hide it by just going into work and being a bit tired, I would. And I don't think that ever helped me, because then it makes you less confident. It makes you a lot more stressed. And especially working in a kitchen where you're going very fast paced, it makes you slower, all of that stuff. So then people are like, oh, well, maybe it's something else. Maybe he went out and got drunk last night. Maybe he's on drugs. Maybe he's this, that. And I've gotten all that stuff. And it really put me in a place where it's like, no, listen to what I'm saying. If if I could be here at my full potential, I would be. That's all I've ever wanted in my life.
I feel that, Daniel. I definitely understand that with you. How how do you find you're doing now with that, and with your like with the depression and the feeling alone? Like how are you now?
I'm doing a lot better with it. I mean, I've really tried to surround myself with people who are understanding, and people who either know my situation a lot, or some of them don't, but all of them are very understanding about it and are great to share things with. They're great to offer help, or excuse me, even things like, drives and all that stuff. There's been so many people who have stepped up. And I always say, like, even if you're doing something small and you don't think, oh my gosh, just to drive into town, that's nothing, don't worry about it, well, that means a lot to me. Or somebody who will, just listen about some stuff that had gone on. Each of those things, you don't have to be changing the world. All you have to do is give a few minutes, give it drive, all of that stuff. And it really means the world to anybody. It makes me feel less depressed about things. It makes me feel like I can be part of society, like I can give back in some way. I mean, I just had my surgery about month and a half ago, which is why I'm constantly wearing this hat. But um, I got into a state after that where, okay, I'm feeling good after my surgery. I should be able to go back and, back to work, start applying for jobs. But then I know the last time I had my surgery, it was more of a process. And there was nerve pain that came on afterwards. And I then didn't really get up out of bed from that one for almost 6 months. So this one, I was trying to be very careful and be like, okay, you can do this much, but don't overdo it. Because if you overdo it, you're going to hold yourself back. And I was able to recognize this time when I was going down into that little depression spiral and say, no, we're going to stop that. We're going to get out of bed. We're going to go for walks, get out and garden, get out and do this. And sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it takes somebody to give you a little kick in the butt and say, get up and go. There's no reason for you to be inside on this nice day. But there's been a lot of people who have played parts in helping out. And uh, a lot of thanks goes to all of them.
I cannot agree more. I hope you do know that you are enough and you do matter and you do count, Daniel, and you're not alone in this. In any part of your journey, you're never alone.
No, that means a lot, and it's something that I try and tell people with different things too, because um, the more people feel like they aren't alone, the less they will feel like they're isolated, secluded, that they can't do this or they can't do that. It's all about building people up. It's all about giving them the power to know that they can do change.
That they can do change, and that no matter how dark a situation is, even if it's the smallest positive, there's always a positive that to be found, and there's always a light at the end of your tunnel.
Absolutely. Absolutely. 100%. Well, I mean, just one of the things that I've really noticed over the past couple of years is the things in my life that I consider, something not to talk about, something to hide. Immediately when you get that out in the open and you bring light to that, even if it's just to one person and they're like, "Oh my God, I totally understand," or "I get that," or "I didn't know that." It's that weight lifted off you. So then the next time you do it, you don't feel like, "Oh my God, I can't do this." Well, you did it before, you can do it again.
Mm-hmm.
And each time after that, it gets easier and easier and easier.
It does, and I mean, even so, when my seizures first changed, like, and I started talking about the change in them, like, I got so for my first diagnosis, like, I went through that, like, scared to tell, wasn't sure how to start the conversation, and then I got better and I could do it, and I was like, do it like a second, like it was some casual conversation, and then my seizures changed, and the first time I spoke out about the change of them was at like a Purple Day event in um, a little bit away, and like a Bikers Down event, and I I cried. Like it was like starting all over again.
Mm-hmm.
That like, and because when you talk about it, it also in a sense it makes it more real.
Yeah.
You're accepting it. You're accepting it and you're embracing it almost.
Yeah, and for me, another thing that when I was no longer to work in culinary, what really influenced me to choose the career that I'm now on, I'm a paralegal and work in the legal industry, and I've always had that. I love the legal world and that stuff. But what really gave me that influence was to know that in this industry, I can help people. I can help people who are perhaps coming up against something like that. I can do the research. I can do you know the one-on-one talking or anything like that, and it gives you more empathy towards somebody's situation.
It really does, and that's one reason why I love doing Purple Days because I can, even if I just help one person, like that's an amazing feeling. And going into film, like I was torn between like film, because I'm really artsy, but also like a medical field. But where film, you can, everyone watches TV and movies.
Mm-hmm.
So if I can help someone through a film or a TV show that I do, that I'm a part of, whether it's someone watching it at home or someone that's on the crew or set, then I don't know, it's worth it.
Oh, definitely. And, all of the doctors and all of the nurses and coordinators and everybody who is out there who gives their whole heart to their job and who takes such care of every one of their patients, and that means the world to anybody who has any kind of illness or who deals with the medical system.
It
And, I really have to once again give props to the people over in Halifax, because every time that I talk about my epilepsy team, I always say, you know what? The first time I've ever felt like I wasn't a number or wasn't a file was almost 10 years ago when I first got hooked up with the team in Halifax. And it gives you hope. It really does.
really does. And I, I know, like, you know, like retirement and comes and go, people come and go, but I think we're really blessed with that team because they're so. I did one of these with one of them, and she was saying how like everything that she hears in work for towards at work, she doesn't just forget about it when she gets home.
Oh, see.
Yeah, Sue. Like she she thinks about it all day, all night. Like, even when she's off duty, she's still thinking of ways to help, still wishing the best for these people that she talked to that day. I was just thought popped in my head, so you had surgery, like how are you doing with that?
I've been doing really well. Like my healing time was like for the incision wasn't that long. Now I'm starting to get little headaches, but they're not too bad.
Okay. Is the headache just from like the healing or like the swelling, or is that like?
I think it's probably a little bit of both. It's starting to get into the nerve pain stage, so I'm waiting to get a prescription for that.
Ooh.
Yeah. Anyway, I can't keep you too much longer because I'm getting this thing saying my battery's low and you're gonna cut out, and I don't want to leave you.
Okay, no worries. Well, I'm glad you're recovering good. Thank you so much for doing this, Daniel.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure, guys.
You as well. Thank you.
Okay, see ya.
Take care.
But here you come to sit with me. The northern moon is shining on me. I feel stronger than before. I'm not alone anymore. I look up and you are there.